Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, let me thank our hosts here in Abu Dhabi for, first of all, the amazing venue and the amazing arrangements that they have made for this summit. When the idea was first floated by the authorities in Abu Dhabi to call a summit an Eye on the Earth summit, there were some eyebrows that were raised. Do we really need a summit on this? What does Eye on the Earth mean? Hasn't the world got enough data already and many networks and platforms on which to work? But what persuaded us in UNEP to join hands with Abu Dhabi and with the Emirates to try and create an event where we would bring together a professional community of data generators, data managers, data interpreters, data users, essentially those who generate, manage, and use knowledge about our planet, was the feeling that the world still underestimates how little we know about so many things that are fundamental to beginning to manage our existence on this planet in a more sustainable and more effective way. We have heard from President Clinton to my colleague Shah Zukang also just now the broad spectrum of our planetary existence, of the agendas that we have developed around international summits such as the Sustainable Development Agenda, as an attempt to answer the question of how on earth are we going to live together on this planet with now 7 billion people, soon 9 billion people, the latest UNFPA reports even talking about 10 billion people on this planet. The brief introduction this morning, which gave us some of the statistics about people living under water stress conditions and many other aspects that also President Clinton touched on, clearly point to the fact that we have to learn that we can no longer in the 21st century assume that we can just exploit this planet in the name of development, in the name of livelihoods, in the name of producing energy, in the name of generating transport services. We have literally reached a point where with 7 billion people and an still exponentially growing sustainable consumption and production footprint, we are running out of things to find, to use, and certainly space in the atmosphere, in the rivers, in the soils, in the oceans that we can pollute. In order to be able to manage our presence and our existence together on this planet, we need to understand the ingenuity of how these systems work better than ever before, because it is the only way that we will actually be able to manage our factor of existence in these systems in a more sustainable manner. And that is why I believe to have an Eye on the Earth summit at a moment in time when we have more information about the planet than we have ever had before, as a human species at least, at our disposal, is not a waste of time. On the contrary, we need to accelerate the way that we generate data. More importantly, how we begin to connect that data and those data points to each other, because the art, or let's say the science of managing development more sustainably will not be in accumulating data. That is the privilege of scientists, to research for the sake of knowledge and research. Our work, our discussion here is about the interface between that knowledge that is being generated and how we as societies, as individuals, as rulers, as mayors, as entrepreneurs, use that knowledge to manage economies, businesses, agriculture, transport, energy. It is that ability to connect the dots of all that knowledge that we are accumulating that will be at the center of, I believe, the agenda of the Eye on the Earth, but also of the world in general, because our ability to interface with biodiversity, with the ecosystems, with our atmosphere and the atmospheric systems, how we interact with the hydrological cycle, how we follow nutrients in the agricultural sector, how we interpret deoxygenated zones in the world's oceans and trace them back to actual inputs made in the name of producing food. How we discover in the second half of the 20th century, or perhaps not discover, but finally took seriously the fact that a substance we last mostly would have heard about in school, CO2, has now become the single largest driver of economic transformation on this planet in less than 50 years. This is how knowledge can help us, first of all, to understand and appreciate, because many of us would not appreciate that a change in seasons or temperature fluctuations that we experience as a local farmer are anything but the vagaries of nature. It is only by connecting the dots between atmospheric pollution, how our atmosphere influences weather patterns, how our models allow us to interpret how humidity, precipitation, the melting of the two poles will influence the level of our oceans. It is only when we connect those dots we suddenly realize that it is us who are at the heart of that changing weather pattern. At least in many respects, that's what science is beginning to tell us. But it is still imperfect science. And here is another reason why the Eye on the Earth Summit is so important. Many of you will have lived through that episode leading up to Copenhagen and then through Copenhagen and post-Copenhagen when the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, suddenly seemed to be the actual perpetrator of problems on this planet. Not carbon dioxide, not the emitters, not the problems that we are causing with overexploitation of fisheries or anything along those lines. No, it was the scientists because they had the audacity to share their science to their best ability possible, but without perfect knowledge, because perfect knowledge is not something that we should aspire to before we act. But science, peer-reviewed science, information and data put together through many different centers allows us to see the world in a clearer way, to recognize patterns even if we cannot interpret all phenomena with precise cause and effect. But imagine if we didn't have the IPCC, if we didn't have the climate modeling centers, and if we didn't have all the science of the last 50 years, we might just be beginning to even talk about things like global warming and climate change. Our task today is to accelerate and to speed up how knowledge becomes available, how it is connected, and how it can be used. Our work here together, and perhaps not coincidentally on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Abu Dhabi and the unification of the Emirates, but also 40 years almost after Stockholm, the conference where the world first began to talk about the connection between humans and environment as if they depended on each other. That is the anniversary next year, and you heard my colleague Shah Zukang just talk about that conference next year, another event that in some produces a reaction of, should we really have another conference? Well, imagine for a moment if the world didn't actually have a place at which it met and talked. It cannot always and will not always produce the results that we all would wish for. But imagine if we hadn't met in Rio in '92, or we hadn't met in Stockholm in 1972. If we didn't have the Climate Change Convention conferences, where over 190 nations are truly trying to do something that we didn't have to do before, which is to manage this planet collectively, but with the principles of equity and sustainability being the defining parameters. But in order to enable people to do that, they need the kind of information that we talk about when we talk about the Eye on the Earth agenda. It is also why I believe the initiatives that are now on the table here are very interesting and also, I think, very exciting. The notion of citizen science, the idea that people can, with mobile phones, and we saw the numbers today, I still found them stunning, 70% of the world's population, difficult to believe. Maybe I misread the number, but even if it was 50%, imagine the enormous potential we have for people to observe the environment around them and to share data. In fact, in the UK, every year, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds does it. There is a week when every UK citizen is encouraged to watch their back garden and record the birds in there and report this to the RSPB. We have many of these examples. Farmers who have long-standing knowledge about observing their weather conditions and soil systems, indigenous people's knowledge. Citizen science is part of what I hope the Eye on the Earth Summit will also activate alongside initiatives such as the Eye on the Earth Network, which together with a number of partners we are launching here this week, amongst them the European Environment Agency, the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, ESRI and UNEP, and I hope that many of you will join in this. There are 9 initiatives here that are being discussed. Maybe all of them are the ones that should be launched. Maybe not all of them are necessarily the priority, but that is why you are here, as a voice and as a reflection of the diversity of both generators of data, users of data, and ultimately, I hope, also custodians of data. Our work, together with Abu Dhabi and many of you over the coming years, is to empower societies wherever they live, operate, have challenges or opportunities, to manage those opportunities more responsibly and more sustainably. Without information, without data, without a better understanding of how the Earth's systems function, we are truly living on the verge of where humanity is able to change and fundamentally alter the world's life support systems. It's remarkable to think that we have managed to shift from a sort of peripheral part of the global balance of this planet to actually being a determining factor of its future in less than 200 years. That alone demands of us a far more responsible understanding of how a planetary future can be ensured. It also speaks to the fact that much of the knowledge that can be generated through those who understand species, biodiversity, natural ecosystems will be fundamental to the future of our economies. The fact that we have spent 200 years in the illusion that something that has no economic value in the systems of national accounting is somehow therefore not of value and is not valued by society is an expression of ignorance, not knowledge. But this ignorance depends on the kind of work that we can bring together to the global public to change the way policymakers in future will value ecosystems. That is why our work on the green economy and the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity is so fundamentally dependent on precisely the sort of things that we are discussing here. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, let me end my brief presentation this afternoon by inviting you and calling upon you to take advantage of Abu Dhabi's hospitality and generosity to have created an opportunity. It's not for any single actor in this world to guarantee something, but I think the invitation that we have received this year here into the Emirates and into Abu Dhabi in particular, and by the Environment Agency, is one that hopefully you will seize, take home with you, and hopefully nurture from the many different nodes that you can operate on. And I hope, it is my wish and certainly the reason why UNEP became so actively engaged in this summit, that we will meet here again, whether in 2 or 3 years' time, to actually continue to build a platform that speaks to the kinds of issues that we are addressing since yesterday and will do so also over the coming days. I would like to end by also paying my personal tribute and appreciation to Her Excellency for having been both willing and able to engage with so many different partners. It is not easy to organize such an event, particularly when you have so many different actors who are part of shaping it. I hope that you will feel encouraged as a result of both the echo and the response that is here, and more importantly, that the declaration that comes out of Abu Dhabi does make its way to Rio. Because Rio is not an endpoint. It is, if you want, a kind of turbocharger. And into that agenda, we need to bring an even greater commitment to science, empirical evidence, and a knowledge about how this planet works and its ingenious systems that keep us all alive. Thank you.